It's our honor to introduce and welcome our guests on the panel. We have Dr. Tan Wee Kee, who is an agri-food tech business owner. We have Ms. Melin Lin from the Singapore Food Agency, who will be providing us with a nationalistic view towards food security. We also have Prof. Chew Fook Tim, who is the Vice Dean of the NUS Faculty of Science, who will be sharing his perspective from the research angle. And a detailed write-up of our panelists can be found on the InnoFest website under today's agenda. We're also privileged to have Mr. Brian Koh, Director at NUS Enterprise, to be moderating today's forum. And without further ado, let us pass this time over to Brian to comment on the forum discussion. Brian, please.
Karen, thank you so much, and a very good morning to everyone. It's day 3, as you've heard, and it's wonderful to be here in our annual event of InnoFest. I think today's topic is very interesting for many at heart, but I want to put some parameters around this whole discussion. For one, we're not going to talk about chicken rice. Okay, we've heard so much about this. Let me start off by saying, and for those to put maybe our overseas guests, to put some perspective into what's happening for Singapore and why is this such an important topic for each of us. As a small nation with almost no natural resources at all, we have 3 problems that we need to look into. First of all, water sustainability is one of them, and we've gotten through that to a large extent with desalination, with filtration and all these other technology. The 2 other areas that we need to look into is food security and then energy itself. So food is something that we need to, particularly at this point of time, because as you know, with all the happenings of the world from COVID, and as earlier mentioned, even incident like the Ukraine war has also disrupted a lot of our logistics globally as well. And of course, I won't get into the energy topic, but that's probably something that we need to look into, hopefully in the near future. Now, if you think about the Singapore story, to continue on that, to put some context into it, we really need to address it. And Singapore, through the Singapore Food Agency, actually looks into this in 3 baskets, in a sense. So we look at having it in terms of diversifying food sources. So we import from multiple sources around the world, and we actually import from about 170 countries. So that actually tells you how wide we are actually looking in terms of our food source. And then we do growing overseas, and then finally growing locally. So today, for the context, we're going to look into how we look at growing locally. And it almost sounds impossible for a country like Singapore to grow, because land scarcity is a big problem. And that's one of the things that we want to discuss this morning, because how can a country that with land scarcity be able to solve some of these? At the National University of Singapore, we believe that this is possible with technology. And that's really what we want to look into for this morning. So, as earlier mentioned with my distinguished panel, and I must say, what's great about this panel is we are friends. So, we put us together, and we actually don't stop talking, in a sense. But let me quickly introduce each of them from a very personal viewpoint. Mei Ling, who's the Senior Director in Singapore Food Agency, SFA for short. But one thing to highlight is her team oversees and drives the development of technology and innovation for tropical, urban agriculture, aquaculture, and food technology. So the 3 areas in for short, we call it Agritech, Aquatech, and Food Tech. She actually has a wonderful background in history, because I think background-wise, botany, right? From NUS, she has to say that, yes. And then she's done a lot more things. She was just telling me she even did corporate, corporate. Professor Chew Fook Tim is the Vice Dean of the Faculty of Science, NUS. But let me highlight something very interesting about him. His key area of research is in genetics of allergy and skin disease, as well as large-scale crops and animal breeding. I've learned so much from Fook Tim because, he has a lot to say, and I won't go into that, and we use this panel to hear from him. And then Wee Kee is the co-founder and CEO of New Soil. She's very passionate about startup, and that's why it's great to have her here from that perspective as well, because she looks into deep tech. And she is in a startup that looks at to promote ways to resource recycling in the support of sustainable urban farming. She also has actually a particular interest, in a very specific area, salt tolerance in plants. So you see, we actually have a lot of this deep tech science into what we're trying to put in place. So with that as a context, let me start off by and I want to first start off, directing the question to Mei Ling, in terms of to solve this 30-30 vision itself, what are some of the strategies, in Singapore that we can look into, that we must adopt, given what I've put as the parameters of what we've seen? Mei Ling, please.
Okay, so thanks for the question, and hello everyone. As what Brian had said, we have in Singapore only about 740 square kilometers. So it depends on how you count, but roughly that. And less than 1% is actually used for food production. Well, if you think about it, if you want to do 30 by 30, it doesn't mean that we are going to multiply the amount of space that we're going to use for farming, because then we won't be able to build the houses, the industry, the commercial buildings, and all the other needs that we have for logistics, so on. So which means that we need to think about food production in a different way. For many countries, it is possible for them to use their peri-urban areas or at least their suburban areas to do that. In Singapore, suburban, right? I stay in Jurong. I don't call that suburban. But what it means is that the way that we look at agriculture is really about something that it's very space efficient. Things like vertical farming where you can stack different layers. On top of that, you can probably stack floors on each other so that you can then multiply productivity per square meter. For example, in aquaculture, you typically think of aquaculture as being in the sea, but we now have aquaculture in an industrial building. So we have people growing fish and shrimp in tanks in an industrial estate. We have purpose-built barges and structures that can grow fish in the sea, but in an intensive manner that protects it, firstly, from the adverse conditions of the sea. Sometimes you get algal bloom. And the other thing is that you can also clean the water before you discharge it back into the sea. And on top of that, we also had an attempt of building a multi-story aquaculture farm. So when you look at this, then that is really what we're looking at, the use of science and the use of technology, marrying biology, engineering, IoT, etc., in order to deliver food production in a very compact space. Now, the other thing that we need to think about is also resource use, like what Brian mentioned as well. Not only do we import water, we import energy as well. So as we do food production, we must also be mindful that water is for human, energy is for human activities. So therefore, for agriculture, pardon me, we also have to worry about the resource efficiency. So looking at things that you can't, you have to recycle the water, you have to treat the water, you have to look at green energy solutions, looking at low energy or low carbon footprint for farming as well. What came up from COVID also was the idea about resource resilience, and not just food resilience. So if you can produce food, right, but where is your fertilizer coming from? Where is your feed coming from? All those are things to think about. So we look at technology that's highly productive, resource efficient, and also climate resilient, given that there is this change in climate that is not just the temperature rise, but the extreme weather events happening more frequently. So that, in a nutshell, is what we look at.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mei Ling, for providing that 50,000 feet view from what we need to look at strategies for a country. I want to bring it down to the ground with Wiki, who's from a startup viewpoint, and maybe you can look at it and share with us when you built your startup. What are you looking at with all these big strategies? What are you doing on the ground that can make a difference in that sense?
Very good morning to everyone. Thanks, Brian. So from a startup point of view, of course, we are not so financial rich in that sense. So a lot of things, we do have a lot of ideas we want to do. We need to prioritize what are the things that the lower hanging fruits that can be done. And of course, research-wise, you can go all up. Everything you can also try. But when it comes to startup, you have to be more pragmatic and look at things that you think is more feasible. You can increase the production through urban farming or vertical farming, for example. But the one thing that we need to take care of is we need to have artificial lighting. So we also know that by increasing the light intensity substantially, the plants you can boost the growth definitely. But it always comes down to dollars and cents. Is it at the end, can we really produce it in a profitable way? So all these are from a startup point of view that we have to always keep on reminding ourselves. Resources-wise, we do have, but we also need to take into consideration whether is it feasible as the startup. So we have to be mindful in that sense.
Yeah. Thank you, Wiki. And yeah, I want to double click a little bit on what she has just mentioned. In fact, exactly this, and using the example of increasing the light intensity, and in fact, well, I have a lot of plant experts here. Some people say the plant don't need to sleep, so you leave the light on, they'll grow 24 hours, but I know that's not true, and that's exactly why we have Folk Team here. I must say, there's once I was in his office, and then he was telling me all these things and strategies and all that. Then I said, I really don't understand Folk Team. So he sat me down for 2 hours, and he actually has a very interesting story. So I don't know, I'm not going to take the 2 hours here, but maybe Folk Team, if you can give us, your perspective of how you look at phenotypes and what you really believe. He's very passionate about this, let me tell you this. And I think this is something that as a country, and when I talk about technology can solve this, I think this is one area. So Folk Team, if you can enlighten us, please. Thank you.
So I think Mei Ling, thank you very much everybody for being here and for being interested in this area. Mei Ling has set us the parameters to say that we really need to be resource efficient, not just intensive, but efficient, and so forth. So that, and I think our startup culture here is very good to be very practical too. What people at the university also have to come to the point is that we need to then pivot people to enable them to see things that way, but still make them profitable. I give you an example. When you say we grow things indoor, most of the time people don't have the time to go and study and survey all kinds of plants, and they will take whatever that is available, maybe planted outside, and then try to grow them and improve on it by improving the lightings and more resources and so forth. Now, if you actually have the ability to say, if I can find a plant, normally it will take 2 weeks to grow this big, but actually there are plants out there that can grow in 2 weeks double that amount. Technically, just by having that ability to use that, you technically double your yield. Same resource, same everything else. So with that same idea, the university has come in to say, this is something an institute can do. We will scour the whole world to find something like that. You want something that grows normally, everybody grows them in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, this big. But naturally, there's something out there that could actually do double that. But nobody has the time to go and look, right? But that's the work of people like us who will then look around and say, hey, naturally there are these things. That's the first thing we will be able to do. And by just having that ability to find and make a lot of that and propagate it back to our companies who are now producing, we can help them. That's one idea. The next idea is, most of the time when we say phenotypes, we talk about the term phenotype. We think that, all right, I want something big, because we just talked about big just now. Big is a phenotype. Big is a phenotype I can see. And then if I see it, I choose it. I'm assuming if I take the seeds from these big ones, I grow them, there's a tendency to be big as well in the next generation, But technology now has the capability to see things that our naked eye don't see. And that's where people like us who are geneticists are able to say, I can now look deep into the organism and find out what we call genetic markers or traits that actually represents, if you have this marker, you tend to have an ability to grow big. And I'm not talking about modifying any organism here. But that ability to now see what we used to not be able to see, the technology is now available. Why don't we make this widespread? That means make people have that ability to see these things. I give you an example. I used to work and consult for a company that has to grow, let's just say, a fruit. But you won't be able to see the size of the fruit until you grow it for 3, 4, 5 years. But then you have to put the plant onto on the ground for 3, 5 years and wait for it to grow and then produce the fruit. By the time it produces the fruit, you have invested 3 years of your life onto this. What happens if you chose the wrong one and then you cut, you realize that, hey, the fruit is not that big anyway. But if you have now that ability to see the markers, the genetics that really correspond to this 100%, and these markers are able to tell you this will be a big fruit. Technically, even at the seed level, you can just take that seed, see this marker and say, this will be a big fruit, almost telling you the secret there. Grow it for 3 years, you almost, with a 95% confidence interval, that's why I always say it, right? 95% confidence interval, it will be a big fruit. Now, to any businessman out there, that's a good bet, isn't it? So, that's what technology should be doing. Technology should raise the level of that sea where all the boats on that sea come up together. I find that that's what the university, the institutions must see further and must enable the entire ecosystem to rise up. Maybe I put that as the first perspective.
Thank you, Folk Tim. And as you can tell, or maybe I should say Professor Chu. Yeah, that's why we have him on the panel. Actually, it's a very interesting area. And if some of you are looking into this whole area, let me give a bit of a perspective in this. In fact, it's very interesting because what Folk Tim has just mentioned, they are collecting data. And you know, in many areas, we're talking about data twinning. This is actually really something that he's moving into. And why are we bringing this topic in? Because precisely for this panel, what we want to discover is the strategies that we want to put in place to enable the 30-30 vision cannot be things that are just incremental. They have to be disruptive in that sense, and therefore then address the issue of how do we produce that 30% of nutritional value for the country itself. I mean, I always pride or look at countries like Netherlands and France who are able to produce more than what they are able to, and certainly that's something that we aspire to be. Now, putting all this into context, and we want to hear from the panel, each of them, but you know, just as what has been mentioned and what Folk Tim has said, that you know, if we want to do some of these to help both address the technology, the deep tech, and then it has to make business sense as well. Because as you know, right now, if you look at urban farming, it's not cost effective. That's what many people say. Now, I want to put some parameters on this because there are 5 areas I would say that we need to look at, which is what the university, NUS Enterprise is looking into. Several things that crop up would be space and infrastructure. So land production, sea space and all these. Right now, I believe it's less than 1% that's being used for this space itself. How do we efficiently use what is available, possibly increase it a little bit more? I know there's a lot of discussion here. Regulations and regulatory changes. When you have new technology, as in many other areas itself, it disrupts what is the policy itself. So something that, it is a very big topic. When we had our Zoom session just to meet one another, I think we spent don't know how long on that. But really this is something also we need to also consider. Another area, which is the universities area itself, well, not just universities, it's also, if you are a startup, you're a founder, this is one area where we talk about innovation and research, sometimes called the food story 2.0, right? But not just a central view, but maybe more a collaboration view also. Mei Ling mentioned a little bit earlier that, it's not just the production of, agri and aqua in a sense, but it is upstream and downstream because, your feeds, your fertilization also comes into play as well. Fourth, the whole ecosystem is very important also. So this is something the university is doing a lot. And just to take a lead on what Fook Tim was mentioning earlier, what he's saying, I can tell you it's not theoretical anymore because he's actually brought a team. We're working with them. He's produced kale in 3 weeks, I believe. A big kale in 3 weeks. So that is really taking, as you have heard the term, the phenotype and changing it. I'm not changing it, but selecting them and then being able to grow it in 3 weeks. So that's disruptive in that sense. And then finally, which is where we are seeing, and we are seeing a lot in Singapore, how do we engage and have everyone being part of this? So the public engagement side of things, how do the citizens and stakeholders on the ground really play a part in this? So with these 5 areas, can I just throw this back to the panel and let's have this as a dialogue, in having your views in some of these to encourage and solve some of the 30-30 vision approaches.
Maybe I can start off. There is always this perception that high-tech farming is not cost efficient or cost effective. I think at the end, right, if you look at production, it's all about the quality and, of course, the quantity. Let's put quantity aside, but it's the quality and the price that the farmer is able to produce. And on the other side is what's the quality and the price expectation of your consumer. Now, if the technology is able to bring down the price, bring up the quality to match a consumer's expectation, then you will find that the final lap, right, between supply and demand will be oil. Without that offtake, you can produce a lot of food, but it's not going to motivate the farmer to produce more, and neither is it going to motivate the farmer to invest in more technology to grow more because nobody's going to eat that. On the other hand, from the consumer point of view, that it is understandable that you will look at price. But there is also this element which is invisible. So I remember not this year, but last Chinese New Year, a colleague of mine came to me and said, well, many, come. My wife bought this vegetable from the supermarket, and when she brought it home, there were a lot, it was okay, but then the next day there were a lot of tiny holes. So I asked her, what does it look like? So he gave me a picture. So I said, where do you buy it from? From the supermarket. From where? Imported. Then I said, sorry, I can't help you. Because if it came from a local farm, we could actually run off to the farm and say, hey, what is happening at the farm? So, which is back to consumer, which is the last box there. It's that for scientists and technologies and in startups to want to be in this space, that producing more is only one side of the equation. But at the other end of the equation is who will offtake it. Now, there is also this kind of a duality that at the end, if startups only produce for Singapore, well, you can count the number of millions we have and it's still single digit. Even with your tourists moving around, that's what we have. But what we think is there's also an economic capture and a value that Singapore can have as an innovation hub. And that would mean that while solving our problems with food security, with food supply resilience, that we provide an opportunity not just to feed ourselves, but we have an opportunity to feed, firstly, cities that are like us. And then eventually, when things become more adverse, when climate change, we can't handle some things, then they become solutions to a wider population out there. And we think that that economic capture is something that's quite attractive. But of course, I come from SFA, and SFA is a food resilience and a food security agency. But we see that twin. Now, some people come to us and said that, oh, we have this product, it's very good economically, and a lot of people use it, but why don't we want to support such research in Singapore? But at the end, it's about prioritization. That from a food agency point of view, that is where innovation matters most to us. But of course, in our research environment, there are a lot of opportunities as well. We see international research companies coming to Singapore to do research that is probably more attuned to demands for plantation crop, for large field crops and things like that. So that's where the ecosystem becomes very exciting. And actually at the heart of it is really science and tech. And Singapore's reputation in the high quality of research that we do, the regulatory regimes that we have, and basically the capability of our talent and our people and the ecosystem that supports research. So that's my comment on
Thank you, Mei Ling. I'd like to hear from either Wiki or Fook Tim.
Yeah, so Mei Ling really hit the nail where it is supposed to, because we, while want to address the 30 by 30, we should really be talking about helping humanity overall. And this makes sense because at the end of the day, from the business point of view, it is really not viable just to say, I just want to do business in Singapore within our 75,000 hectares, right? But the other thing also is that whatever we do to address the 30 by 30, actually, it's not just about indoor farming. It's applicable in the large plantations. And actually, it also fits into our other strategy. Our other strategy about not just producing in Singapore, but also producing outside Singapore. If we assist others to produce and produce better and faster and also better quality, indirectly it helps this country as well, right? So that is, therefore it's more encompassing rather than just say, we just want to do 30 by 30 and do it in Singapore. That's one perspective. Now the other thing would be also the issue of not just looking at production space alone, the issue of downstream and upstream, the modifications of things into higher quality products would also be very important. At the downstream or upstream level where, we just say, oh, indoor farm, why don't you just give them 24 hours light? But if you didn't know plants cannot take it if you have 24 hours light. Everything that is a living organism, you live on in too much resource. It's just like, can you be eating all the time 24/7? You can't, right? Your metabolism was not made to be like that. And therefore, we have to understand the natural phenomena and then understand this natural phenomena, but to be able to move it to the direction that we want it to be. That understanding is actually very critical. And that's what people at the university always tries to emphasize as well, right? And maybe I'll let Vicky mention this as well.
So if you can see, actually it's a 3-line, or rather a go down all the way to the startup. So you can have the agency or whoever to look at the regulation, things like that, and all the policy making. Subsequently to research, that's where they can spend more resources and time on the research part, which startup cannot do. But staying there, you are not moving as well. So you have to come down to the industrial part, where someone like the startup or other SME come in to translate whatever is being researched on to a reality. Reality meaning that at the end you still want to see the production. So production comes in at the business level. And for you have to think along the line that a certain balance needs to be sought. Cannot have too much of the research and cannot have too much red tape as well, because with that it actually hinders the startup to move on. And at the end of it, what we are looking at is not just the quantity but also the quality. Quality, you could look at ways that we can improve on the nutritional values of the products that we produce. Yeah, so at the end of it, it's all come together and we have to work hand in hand to make sure that things can move. Yeah.
Thank you very much for giving each of the perspective. And let me kind of summarize when I asked that question and started off with, looking at what are some of the approaches and strategies that we can do. Mei Ling talked about this area. So, as a startup, as a founder, or if you're a researcher and looking to technology itself, don't just produce because you think it's going to be good. But we also need to look at the business perspective of this. And this is something she has emphasized. So in many other areas that we look at it is product market fit, and also the market viability will have to come into play. So even in this whole area of Agritech, we can't ignore that. I think both Mei Ling and also Folk Team mentioned that, you need to look at this whole perspective from one thing is the brand name that Singapore has, and the tech that we want to develop locally as well. So if you look at something like this, it's true. It's as we develop some of the technologies here, while we address food security locally, it's also addressing and the potential of such technologies being exported out. At the university, I can tell you, we have actually many established cities that are coming to us to say, hey, if you have urban farming technology, we want to adopt them. And these are some of the cities that also already produce farming in that sense. Now, let me tell you and give you a bit of a perspective why. Now, we talk about urban farming and we know that, they say it's not cost effective. It's not cost effective from depending on how you look at it. But if we can increase the yield, which Folk Team mentioned about, and in fact, Wiki can also talk about this because this is an area that she's very much focused on. Wastage is a very big thing. So if you think about open farming, you'll be surprised that, wastage is on a very high side, 30%, maybe even 40% in less productive underdeveloped countries. So there's a lot of wastage there as well. So if we can reduce, because in urban farming, it's very, very little wastage. Actually, if we can and put it into a very efficient way, it's almost zero in that sense. So this is an example of where, when we talk about strategies, and in Agritech, this is something, and as well as probably Aquatech, this is where we also want to go into. Now, let me just let the audience know that I do want to leave some time for Q&A. So if you have a question, I want to, put maybe about 10 minutes. But maybe as we move into the next discussion, as we talk about broadly, if I can ask the panelists on areas that you think innovation that will move the needle has to take place so that we can then embark in this whole strategy of the 30-30 vision. Maybe can we have a perspective of that? Maybe I start with Wiki. What do you think are some of the innovation that we can see then that will move the needle in that sense?
In terms of innovation, of course, there are so many out there. So again, we have to think along the line that which one is more pragmatic. Here, of course, in Singapore context, water is one issue that we need to consider. So anything that can help in saving the water will be one area that need to look into. And I'm a plant person, so definitely I'll think along the line from plant growth point of view. We need fertilizer as well. So are there any areas that we can boost the growth, not necessarily just on relying on fertilizer, because this part we also need to rely on outside import to come in. And another area, I still feel that the light tapping from the sun is the best, even though from vertical point of view, vertical farming point of view, this could be challenging. So are there any ways that we can tap on the sun? And this is one way that we can actually save the electricity. So that's where all the researchers from the university need to tap on and bring it down to the startups or business level for us to work on.
Thank you, Mei Ling. Vicky. Mei Ling, what about your point of view?
Okay, I got no magic bullet, so I don't have one answer. So, okay, so some of you might know that there is a Singapore Food Story R&D program that was launched a few years ago. We are actually coming up with 2.0. I can't share that because it's still in the works. But under 1.0, we were looking at urban production itself, looking at the various aspects of genetics, health, and so on. We're also looking at future food, about what will be coming up in the future. Will it be microbial proteins, algal proteins, or cellular meat? Underpinning this would be food safety science. Not just food safety itself, but the science of determining food safety. Because a lot of the old models are animal models where you test it, but human beings are not exactly, do not have exactly the same biochemistry, physiology as animals, but do we have a laboratory equivalent? Or even in terms of risk assessment of some of these new techniques that are coming up, do we need to up the science of it? So that was what we see in 1.0, these two boxes underpinning food safety, because food that's not safe is not food, right? Now, in terms of just tackling the urban production itself, we see it kind of like 3 verticals, 2 horizontals, something like that. One of it is really about the genetic potential, like what Prof said. Genetically, what does that organism able to do? If you give it all the best things, this is what it can achieve. We call it genetic potential. To realize the genetic potential, you need to do selection. Now, if you don't like GM, you don't like editing, let's just look at nature. Nature is a bell curve. So you look for those that are at the upper end of the bell curve or the lower end of the bell curve, and you try to shift it through selection and through using markers, using tools that we understand and we have been using for human biology anyway. Then the next thing, the next center is what we look at, health and nutrition. Because in order to realize the genetic potential, you need to make sure you give them good nutrition, right? And also make sure they don't die of diseases or they suffer attacks from pathogens, so they slow down in their growth. So that is an area that we would like to look at, even, for example, for plants, pest diseases, things that affect parts of the plants in the production. The third one, we look at it as Industry 4.0 or Agritech 4.0. Really about marrying the IoT and looking at how we can twin that, so that if I see a leaf and it's growing at this pace, I have to measure it every day to find out whether it's growing at the pace that I want. Remember, he was saying that you grow it at that speed, right? You want to predict it. Can we twin it together so that a plant, we call it precision farming, that you are able to monitor what's happening in the environment so that your environment fits the genetics of the plant. You give it all the nutrition and protect it from whatever you have. Now, there are 2 other horizontals that I also briefly touched on, and one is about sustainability. At the end, you have to look at your resource use efficiency, including light as well. So, if let's say the good thing about plants is that you don't feed them 24 hours, but you can feed them light at night, when the rest of us don't use it. So it's cheaper, it's probably more available from the power sources. So therefore, in terms of sustainability, looking at the resource use. And another one really kind of related to it is about valorization, waste valorization. Can we look at other industries that have waste materials, for example, the spent brewery grain, the okara and so on, can they become feed that fits it back into a food production system that can then reduce your resource needs at the top? And of course, the other one is about waste treatment. Now, there are some ways that there's no way you can valorize it, and also psychologically, we cannot get over eating some of those waste. Then we're looking at, can we recover energy from it? So material recovery, energy recovery, these are some of the things that, if you put it into a nutshell, would be my concept of the 3 verticals and 2 horizontals.
Thank you, Mei Ling. Very important, and I hope you caught some of these. There are a lot of opportunities available. Tim, on your side of things.
Well, I want to leave some time for questions. I love to have questions.
Sorry.
But I think to be able to summarize it all, there is no one magic bullet, but actually one has to actually see the whole ecosystem, but also one has to really see how we can integrate many of these components, because there is no one standalone at the end of the day. But let's take some questions.
Thank you. And with this, I want to open the time to the audience. If you have any questions, yes, we have. If you could identify yourself.
Yeah,
and then,
of course. Thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. I'm Andreas. I'm from Germany. I work at Bitkom, which is Germany's tech association, and I'm responsible for the food vertical and also the farming vertical, so dealing with smart farming, food tech innovation, and I like that you stressed the importance of having a ecosystem. That's exactly what we're doing as well. We're representing startups, corporates from the tech and agricultural industry, and bringing them together also with university, government, and so on. I have a million questions, but I want to maybe address one topic that is cultured meat. So Singapore, from my point of view, is like, on a global level, also one of the leading economies. Like it is the first country that allowed like the commercial, like just meat that you can actually buy that in the supermarket. So I was wondering if that is something you're looking into from a food perspective. Food security perspective, is that something you think could help Singapore to become more, to foster the food security? So cultured meat, lab-grown meat.
Okay. So your question is, are we looking into cultured meat and
exactly? Is that part of the strategy of the 30 by 30 strategy?
Yes. Okay. Broadly, I would say yes, and I want to tap on the knowledge and wisdom of my panelists. Maybe let me start with Mei Ling first, because I knew there's a lot of work done, and then I'll leave it to both Wiki or Fokti, because yes, certainly.
Yeah. So earlier I talked about SFS, the Singapore Food Story R&D 1.0. So one of the themes is about future food, and there were some research projects that have been funded there that are related to cellular meat and so on. Certainly, if you look at our 30 by 30, what we're looking at is nutrition. So if you ask me what does nutrition look like, then we refer to the HPB, our Health Promotion Board's Healthy Plate, that looks at half of it fruit and vegetable, and a quarter of it proteins, and the other quarter of it carbohydrates. And if you look at cellular meat, that will cover that protein area. So are we focusing only on cellular meat? I think the answer is no, because we're looking at it as a whole plate. But if you look at cellular meat and how it's it is certainly attracted a lot of attention, and that it is not just in Singapore, it's all around the world. In fact, if you were to just scour the internet, you'll find lots of seminars, conferences, and a lot of research money thrown into it, including at the startup level and so on. So in terms of this, what we, from the SFA point of view, it's the regulatory aspect of it. We have come up with a novel food framework, and we actually encourage that if you are a scientist that's involved in it, and the advice is engage the regulatory agency early to understand what are the requirements and also what is our principle behind the considerations, and that will give you an idea of how your research trajectory or how that information should flow. I think that is one of the key enablers for us, is to really have frameworks in place so that whatever innovation is up. Back to that box about regulatory and regulatory control, being able to converse with the regulators early. So to answer your question simply is, it is in our SFS R&D program, and two is that it is part of our plate of protein.
Thank you. Foktin, please.
Yeah. So I think I just want to jump into the statement that Mei Ling made about engaging our regulators and engaging our ecosystem early enough, rather than to say, I've got a product here, I need it approved, right? What has happened, and I've seen this happen because many people engage the university as well. Melin mentioned also about uplifting the quality, the standards of regulatory science. It's not about just saying, let's take something that is adopted in Europe or the US and say, it will fit us here. It's about understanding what really is new, because a lot of these products are new. You do not know what you do not know, technically. But there are basic questions that we will always ask when it comes to regulatory. And I work very closely in this area. For example, I work in the allergenicity because I work on genetics of allergies. And allergenicity is just one of the aspects of when you make a new product. Did you suddenly create a new allergen that you didn't even know? Now, if you had been able to engage the ecosystem early and put it through the process, together we will then put it through and maybe even help in the dossier building so that it sort of enhances and advances you along the way already in the process of getting it approved to a certain extent. And I believe that's what the ecosystem here is about. And that's just one area. But also to enable the startups, there are a lot of technology available. I know of our food science startup who says they have the 3D salmon now and so forth. Very many, and rightly, we realize that the startups are resource focused to a certain extent. And therefore, part of the goal of the university is to say, some of these we have the ability to provide, to let very interesting people try new things. Exactly. Because we don't believe that we have all the ideas. And we must allow that people from outside who will come and say, I have this new idea, but I just don't have the X facility or the X capability or even the understanding or know how to do this. But you know, this is an idea. This is why building this ecosystem was very important, and we believe together we can then facilitate this forward at the end of the day. Hopefully there will be more conversations for you too.
Can I just jump in?
Yeah, sure.
And just like a word from the sponsor, I think you can actually find the novel food framework on our website. There's also this entity called Fresh, which is hosted at NTU, and they also look at it's a future-ready food safety science outfit, and you can also have a chat with them if you want to find out what they're doing, if you have not already.
Thank you. Let me, another question, yeah.
Hi, panelists. Thank you so much for the really insightful chat. My name is Ben. I'm from Hatch Blue, the world's first global aquaculture accelerator. Actually, we just hosted a delegation in SFA and EDB in Norway. So we have offices all around the world and one in Singapore as well. As an accelerator, and also probably asking on behalf of my peers in the Agritech space as well, and with the chat about an ecosystem, what do you see the role of accelerators like ourselves or our peers in building these ecosystems further so that founders like Wiki can scale their startups further? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Why don't I put this to Wiki in that, how do you look at it from a startup viewpoint? I can give a bit of a perspective on this.
Mainly is how accelerator can help us advance. We might have the technology, and the deep tech startup especially mostly are come from research field. So accelerator to come in likely will need to be able to move us forward from the business point of view. How we can cut into the industry and make sure that our technology works and is acceptable by the endpoint user or whatsoever. So I think accelerator coming in this part, I think is important to us. Yeah.
Let me just kind of summarize that a little bit. In fact, in NUS Enterprise itself, yes, we actually have our own accelerator program, but as you can tell, we have many of our incubators or startup that come in and then they move on to another accelerator or someone that can help. So we're very agnostic from that perspective, because to us, whatever that can help them accelerate into the market, That's what is most important for us. So maybe
To make money, in short. Yeah.
okay, so you heard the founder himself said so. Okay, so from that. Okay, let's take another question. Okay. Yeah, one more question there. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, let me take the last question and then I'm going to wrap up. Yeah.
Hi. My name is Luis from Innovate 360. We are a food tech investor and accelerator. My question is actually regarding corporates. So for Maylin, we have all this focus on startups. My question is how the government actually works with corporates who already have scale and bases in other countries, how they are incentivized or maybe held accountable in contributing to our food.
Okay. Thanks. Mei-Ling, maybe you can very quickly answer how corporates... that was actually on my list of questions, but yeah, we won't have time.
So I just want to maybe define a little in terms of, because corporates, it's a very, very wide word. Is that something you want to focus on specifically?
How do the larger corporates come into the picture?
Okay. I can probably just share from, I'm not sure that's the answer you want, but at several levels. We see, for example, if corporates want to set up their R&D center in Singapore, which we have seen, that because of our culture, which is an Asian culture, because of our climatic condition and environment, which is like our neighbors, we also see increasing interest of companies wanting to set up in Singapore the R&D. For example, Adisio is in MAC. The other one that I can think of is also about setting up their corporate headquarters here or a farm here that represents the technology that can be sold to the area. We see them approaching EDB. We work very closely with the other agencies, with EDB on MNCs wanting to come down, foreign companies who want to set up farming in Singapore. We work very closely with ESG also, which is the other way around, looking at the SMEs in Singapore, not just the startups, although the focus seems to be startup, but no, we actually work with our farmers, the SMEs, people who want to develop their farm in Singapore, and also in terms of supporting the farms who want to go overseas. Because as we say in Singapore, the size is limited, so in order to grow a business, you need scale. And that scale will probably be in our regional countries and not in Singapore itself. And that will be working with ESG. Of course, working with A-Star in terms of technology, working with NUS Enterprise, working with other accelerators. I think that's how the different pieces fit in. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but just giving that different levels. If I have not, then perhaps we can have a chat after this.
Let me kind of very quickly summarize that. And in fact, from NUS Enterprise perspective, corporates are a very important element of it. The term that I like to use, corporates are always the demand drivers. So they are part of the whole ecosystem, and we've talked a little bit about that. So that's very important. So ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we are really running out of time. I apologize that we can't have more questions, but the panelists will be around. But would you join me in also thanking the panelists, Folk Tim, Mei-Ling, and Wiki. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.